Okay, so we are recording. Hey Renee, how are you? Good to see you. Hey Michael, we have some MacNair representation here. Morning, Kara.
Felipe. I
Hey.
um I put this out on some channels, so I'm hoping some people come. I was like, you gotta come, you gotta see this.
Yeah. I know that some students from gerontology are not able to be here today because they had some conference today. So we're recording for them.
I'm here. I do have to leave at 12, but I am always excited. I always learn more from you, so I'm here.
Okay. So the goal today will not be to give you an NVivo 101 introduction. I will walk you through several steps on NVivo from creating a data set all the way to running some analysis. So you will learn some tools, but it's mostly to demonstrate to you the power of NVivo, what NVivo can do for your research based on what it has done to my research. If you want to learn more about NVivo, there are some great tutorials on that you can find on YouTube for free. Some of them are by independent scholars, instructors that have created their own tutorials for their students. Others are created by NVivo, so those are usually short videos on very specific tasks. But so yeah, if you after this session today, if you want to learn more in a more systematic, gradual way, I recommend you looking for those tutorials. There's also a book that we used at UMBC when we had an NVivo workshop about that was before the pandemic, so I think it was 2019. But this is the book, Qualitative Data Analysis with NVivo by Christy Jackson and Pat Baisley. Also a great source. This was the third edition. There might be a new one even. I will be sharing NVivo with you on the screen, and what you will see is NVivo as used on a Mac. So those of you who use a PC might see something slightly different. Okay. So let's start with creating a data set on NVivo. Let me share with you my screen. Okay, so you should be able to see this now. Let me explain to you this research first so that you can have an understanding of what these files are. Um, this is a research on religion and immigration. I have facilitated dialogues in faith communities in Baltimore for a few years. Each of these dialogues have 3 weekly sessions, and I have here a total of 7 dialogues that were transcribed, and each dialogue has 3 sessions. I split, the big transcript of a single dialogue into segments that are comparable. So you will see here, for instance, the one that I have selected. This will be dialogue one, the session in which the participants discuss similarities and differences between immigrants and people born in the United States. So if I go here to dialogue two, I have an equivalent segment there on similarities and differences. Same thing for dialogue three, all the way to 7. Right? So you can see all these files here as transcripts of focus groups. Right? That would be the equivalent in a social science language. And I will use only one of these files here to do demonstrations with you because to protect the confidentiality of the data, respecting IRB protocols. In this one file, all the names and personal identifiers are redacted, and you will see that I replaced big chunks of their sentences with word, right? Just to redact the content. Okay. So here I already have all these files, right? So everything that I'm selecting here, each one is a transcript. Suppose I want to import more, right? I can go here on um, data and I can import documents, PDFs, data set in case you want to import a whole spreadsheet. You can import pictures, so you can analyze visual materials on NVivo as well. And NCapture is a tool that NVivo uses to download data from social media. So suppose you want to analyze Twitter posts, right? There is a way that NVivo can import all that data from Twitter or from a certain Facebook page in a way that is already formatted for an analysis on NVivo. In general, on NVivo, you can execute commands by using the menu here on the top, by using the buttons here on the screen here, the middle, home, create, data, analyze, and also by clicking here in the actual body of the work, usually with a right click, right? So you can also perform some functions here too. In NVivo, in general, it's a quite flexible software. You can do, there are always more than one way of doing the same thing, right? And NVivo allows you to look at data from different angles, which I think is something really cool as well. So you can try to see patterns in the data from different perspectives. Okay, so if I wanted to add another file here, another transcript, I will go here to data and I would import either a document, a PDF, any other file here. I could also, if I have, suppose here if I had another, let me take a PDF here that is, you're not seeing the PDF, but it's on my desktop. I can try to import it directly on NVivo here, right? So it's a PDF, I could edit here. So just by dragging the file there, it's another way of transferring. Okay. Once you create the files, so you have here all, it can be transcripts of interviews, it can be news articles, it can be journal articles if you're using NVivo to perform a literature review, which is also good. You can classify the files, right? You can see here file classifications. So to classify a file is, you can create different forms of classification. You can classify a file according to the source, right? According to the type of file. So if you have a project in which you are, let's say, you're interviewing government officials, you're also looking at policy documents, you're also analyzing news stories about that policy, right? So you can classify the files according to the type of the file, right? And you will go here. Here, if I ask the information, it would show me what the file is about, right? So you can have the name of the file, you can describe, so okay, this is interview number this with the interviewee name X from X institution that was conducted on date X, right? And once you create file classifications, it would appear here as an attribute, right? I don't have in this particular project, I didn't classify the files because all the files are the same. They're all focus groups with immigrants and people who are born here, conversations in faith communities. But you could classify them according to different criteria, right? And you will go here to file classifications and you can, try to, create here a new classification. Right? Will be a new way of classifying your files. Okay, so if you go here, always on document properties, get info, you will be able to see all the description of the file so that you don't forget. Here there's no classification, but if I had created a classification scheme for files, those options would appear here. I could also add color, right? So I could say, I'm going to label all the interviews with blue, right? So the blue would appear where here, see color, right? So that would be another way of classifying the files. Let me remove that. All right. Do we have any questions so far?
I'm sorry, you might have explained this. So like classifications, Can like what are some ways that those could be beneficial, like for different types of research? I guess like interviews versus like if you're coding like documents or things like that.
Hmm. Right. So suppose I'm running an analysis. You will see later on the types of analysis that NVivo can do. But suppose I am in that project analyzing a certain policy making process, and I did interviews with government officials. So I have those interviews as a type of file. I have the actual policy documents as another type of file, and I code all those files. And one of the codes is rationale for the adoption of that policy, right? So maybe in the interviews with government officials, they explain to you why they think adopting that policy was important, what was the reason to adopt those policies. And maybe in the policy documents, you also see in the preamble some justification for that. So that code was applied to both, right? But later on in the analysis, you want to be able to compare, right? Is the rationale presented by the government officials the same that ended up in the policy documents? So you want to be able to separate those, right? So you can ask NVivo to show me everything that was coded under policy rationale and that was said by policy experts, right? Because you see that interview about policy of government officials. So you can pull up information only from those files. So that's how classification can help you. Good question. All right, so now setting up the analysis, right? So you created your data set, whatever it is, you classified the files if that's helpful for you. Now, how do we actually analyze them? And as you know, in qualitative analysis, a central procedure is coding, right? So you create a small label that will describe a certain portion of the data. NVivo calls nodes calls codes nodes. So that's the terminology in NVivo for codes. So you see here that under codes, oops, if I hid, now I'm showing the codes. Actually, NVivo calls them nodes. Right? In my work in this research project, I'm interested not only in the substance of what people are talking about in those conversations at churches, but how they're talking to each other, right? So I created two types of codes: thematic codes that I'm going to use to classify and organize the data from a thematic perspective. What is the substance of what people are talking about? So are they expressing anti-immigrant sentiment or not, right? Are they talking about health? Are they talking about education? Are they talking about children, right? So those are, thematic codes that I've used. But I also use some relational codes to classify, to categorize segments of those conversations in which people are agreeing, disagreeing, engaging in critical thinking, right? Giving perspective to other people, taking the perspective of other people, so showing empathy, right? So I'm classifying how people talk and not just what they talk about, right? This is just as an example for you. You can create, different coding schemes, right? So if I go here on thematic codes, you will see all the list of codes that I've used in this project, right? And some codes are what we call parent codes, and other codes are child codes. So here, cosmopolitanism is a parent code. Parent code. I can open it up, and you'll see here the child codes under that broader code. And I can even have another layer here. So that's something cool that NVivo allows you to do, right? You can split, you can have a hierarchy of codes. You will see, as it is common in qualitative research, you will start with a coding scheme, and then in the middle of the analyzing process, you'll want to change it, right? There are some codes that will not make sense. You want to relocate them. You want to merge some codes, and NVivo allows you to do that. So for instance, if I here I have the code economic problems, right? And one of the economic problems, and one of the child codes is poverty. Let's say I want to make poverty something that actually belongs under cultural anxiety. I could just drag it there, and NVivo will take it all there, right? With all the data that you classified under poverty, it will all be moved to under culture anxiety. Right? It's also very easy to delete codes. Right? NVivo also, after you created your whole coding scheme, NVivo will allow you to create a coding book. Let me see here where it appears. Codebook here. So if you go on data, all the way down on codebook, NVivo will create a codebook to you. So let's say if you want to, in your qualitative paper, as an appendix, you might want to add the codebook, which will have the list of codes, subcodes, and how you define each of those codes, right? So something a good practice is also to add a description to the code so that you can if you, let's say, take a break from coding for 1 week and then you go back to coding and you are in doubt, should I apply this code here, migrant sending countries, should I apply this to this segment or not, I'm not really sure. So I can go back there, right click, get info, and I have here what I described as the content that should fall under this code. So any statements that a participant makes about the situation, past or present, of countries of origin of immigrants and how that might be related to immigration, right? So that's how I define that code. So I can always go back there, to make sure that I'm applying that code consistently. And to apply a code, let me open here one of those files, going back to that one example. So here you have my actual transcript, right? So every time that you see F here is what I'm saying as the facilitator. And here I have, what the participants are saying. Right? For this project in particular, I replaced all the names, the personal names of people with a notation. So here I have participant number 10, and this participant is a white Latina, right? That's what WL means, right? That allows me to, helps me analyze the data because I'm also paying attention how participants that have different identities, different social addresses, how they relate to each other, and whether there are some patterns in how, let's say, white Latinas talk about certain things versus white women, for instance. So how this coding looks in practice. So let me go here to thematic codes again. Applying a code is as simple as this. So suppose I think that this statement by this participant expresses culture anxiety. I can just hold here and then drag it to culture anxiety. And there it will be. Okay. Can do the same thing with this other segment here. Let's classify this as an expression of someone is talking about their family. So I can move it here. Right. There are different ways too, so you can, select here. Let me see. Analyze. You can come here to the top left, code selection at an existing node. It will show here which node you might want to place that segment in. So let's say culture anxiety. I think this is more complicated than just, dragging the actual segment to, the column on the left here. Anything about codes, creating codes, applying codes, any questions?
So how do you view which codes are attached to each node, or which pieces of information from the files are attached to each node?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So there are different ways of doing that. So after I coded all the materials, I want to see everything that was coded under, let's say here, cultural assimilation. just double click, and NVivo will show me everything in the different files, everything that was coded under cultural assimilation. So that's one way, right? You can also, something cool that NVivo does, and I always leave this on as I analyze, you can go here to view, coding stripes. It's currently selected known. I'm going to select all of them. So NVivo will show me here on the right everything that was coded in this document, right? So each color here on the right is one code. So here, look at the code family in purple, right? I can click here. Whoops. It should be showing me. Oh, economical. Let's see. I don't know if it's because I'm sharing the screen, but or interactive. Okay, this picked up interactive critical thinking, right? So all the segments in which participants engaged in an interactive process of critical thinking, I applied this code. So if I click here on the right on interactive critical thinking, it will show me everything in this file that was coded where I applied that code. It will show in highlighted yellow. So this is pretty cool too, right? And you can see here all, in any given passage of your transcript, all the codes that you applied here on the right. Right? And here, coding density, here you can see this, first column here. The darker the color here on this bar, this vertical bar, the most codes you applied, right? It's the density of coding. So it's an indication for you, or maybe parts of your transcript that are really important, really telling, right? Because you applied a lot of codes there. Okay. Now to cases, right? So you can apply codes that represent, let's say themes, or in the way of my relational codes, the way that people are talking. Let me show you here the relational codes that I have. You can see here agreement, disagreement, interactive critical thinking, perspective giving. So you can have codes like that that classify information, but you can also have codes that will classify participants, right? So in my case here, every participant is a case. That's how NVivo will call participants, right? If you have interviewees, each interviewee can be a case, right? Let me show you how you can create cases. It's pretty much like creating nodes. Here you have cases. Oops, I don't know why it's not here, cases. Okay. So I have here two different types of cases. Each dialogue is one case, and within each dialogue, I have different participants, so I have participant cases as well. So here you have from 1 to 7 the 7 focus groups, let's say, and inside each of them, I have a number of participants. And here I added there, I'm not naming them, for confidentiality. They all have a participant notation. In the notation, I add a number for the participant. I start with the dialogue that participant was a part of. So dialogue age C1. Here, participant 10, and this participant is a white Latina. I also have here another example, a participant of the dialogue HC1, participant 2, that's a man, African American. Okay. So that means that when I analyze data like this, let's see the transcript here, I can select what participant 10 WL said, and I can, just like with nodes, I can drag there to this case. Right? And I can do that with all participants. Right? Here I have participant 11 WAA. Participant 11 is a white American. No, it's a woman African American. So I can go here to participant 11. I can drag there. All right, so I'm applying basically case codes to the transcripts. Right, so not only I'm classifying this project, what people are talking about, the themes, how they're engaging with each other, is it agreement, disagreement, but also who is talking. All right, so which participant. I can also classify the cases. You can see here on the left that I have cases and also case classifications. So just like you can classify files, whether it is a newspaper article, whether it is a policy document, whether it is an interview, a focus group, you can also classify cases. And that's pretty important in qualitative research. You might want to analyze what your participants are saying from different perspectives. You might want to compare what men and women are talking about. Let's say you're conducting a study with students at UMBC, so you might want to classify the majors that they belong to. You might distinguish them between transfer and non-transfer students, minority, non-minority student. So there are different ways of classifying. And since here I have two types of cases, one is the actual dialogue, the actual focus group, and the other is participants within the focus group, I can classify the congregations, right? So here I have 7 dialogues, and each dialogue happened sometimes within one congregation, sometimes bringing 2 congregations together. And then I also can classify participants. So I have here all the participant cases, right? I think I have here like almost 80 or around 80 participants on total. Okay. And in my case here, I showing info. No, not this. Case classifications. Here you will see how for each I created 2 types of attributes, right? The attribute is the classification, the characteristic that you're using to classify either your files or your cases, right? I'm classifying my cases here, the participant cases, according to their gender and to their race ethnicity, right? So I can see here for every participant, whether they are female, male, or whatever gender, and race ethnicity, whether they are, Latino, African American, white American, and so on. And that's, valid for every participant. And to create attributes, I think you go to, let's see here. Classification, no classification, okay, participant, case classifications should be here. New classification, right? So if supposing in addition to classifying them according to their gender, to their race, ethnicity, I also want to classify them according to level of education, if I have that information, right? So I can create education as a classification, and NVivo will let me create the categories, right? So you can choose, primary education, secondary, post-secondary, so on. You create your classification scheme, right? You just put it there, and NVivo will allow you to apply it, right? Any questions so far about the cases? Okay. Something else that NVivo does is you can create memos, right? So here see how there's a section on notes, and NVivo, some of the notes are called memos. NVivo already has this folder here ready. I usually create in every project that I work on in NVivo procedural memos and analytical memos. And you can see here how I created them. In this case, only procedural memos, not analytical. Analytical I'm keeping in a folder outside of NVivo. So in a procedural memo, I record the procedures that I take in the analysis, right? So did I apply all codes at once as I read the transcript? Or did I apply first a certain subset of codes, then in another round, another subset, and so on, right? So what are the procedures? And for qualitative research, it's usually, I consider important to really, document step by step of the procedures to guarantee, the reliability of your results, to assure that your results, that your findings can be replicated. Someone can follow the same steps again on your data set, and you can compare the conclusions. If you're working in teams of people, right, you can also do that on NVivo. You can make sure that everyone that is coding the data, let's say all the researchers in a team, follow the same procedures, apply the codes consistently, and then run the same type of analysis. So it's good to record, document this all in these memos. Here I have one memo called Coding Procedures, in which I added some notes about how I'm coding things. Right? And the analytical memos are memos in which I type preliminary conclusions. Right. So sometimes after I applied one code throughout transcripts, I already can see some patterns in the data, or I can make some connections between the data and the theory and the hypothesis. So I already typed that down in an analytical memo. And later, those analytical memos, I use them to draft the results, the findings, the discussion of findings section of the paper. And going back to documenting the procedures, that's important qualitative research, because all too often you read a qualitative paper and the method section is two sentences. The data was coded and analyzed thematically. Boom, that's it. Right? And we can do better than that, right? What kind of coding procedure did you use? Was it open coding, closed coding, right? How did you analyze, right? What was the analytical tool on NVivo that you used to analyze the data and find the patterns that you're claiming exist in the data, right? All right. I also like to create a good quote code. That's just a tip. So I have, here's a thematic code, the good quote, right? So whenever I see, whenever I find a sentence, a statement by a participant that I think illustrates really well a certain point, I classify that as a good quote, right? Sometimes you want to include some anecdotal evidence that really illustrates and draw attention to a certain point that you're trying to make. So I at the end of towards the end of the research, I go back to the good quote code and try to find there some good sentences that I can put on the paper. NVivo also allows you to add notes into the body of the text. So I can, suppose I'm reading here a certain passage. Let's see here. Participant 9 is saying, I can look at my mother's situation, right? And that I want to add a note about that, meaning it can be something even, I'm not sure what this participant means here. So I can just do a right click, new annotation, and then I can type here, blah, blah, blah. All right. Okay. Done. So it will appear here like in a light blue shade. You can just, if you sit the cursor of the mouse there, NVivo will make the note pop up. Okay. So that's something else that can be helpful. And you can also edit the content of the transcript. Sometimes I am reviewing a transcript coding and I see a typo in the transcript, or something that, one of my transcribers transcribed a word in a certain way, and I know I was there in that interview or that focus group. I know that that's not what the participant said. I remember that. I can go here and edit on the right and she say, I can look at my mother's situation. I can, delete that, let's say my mother's house instead, right? So NVivo also allows you to do that, to edit the document once it's there, at least text, right? I don't think you can do that with images. On NVivo, you can also autocode, right? That's something really cool that NVivo can do, but you have to format the document that you are importing in a certain way. Basically, I think one of the rules, I've never used that in my own project, but if you format on Word, if you format each question on the transcript as a heading, and then the answer that the interviewee gives to you as normal text, if all the transcript is formatted that way, you import to NVivo, you ask NVivo to autocode, NVivo will be able to recognize all the questions in your text, and it will code the answers accordingly, right? So each question will be a code, and NVivo will apply that code to every time that question appears in your transcript of some interview. NVivo will apply, so NVivo is automatically coding the data for you, right? NVivo can also code according to participant automatically, right? So if you format the name of the participant in a certain way in what they're saying, then NVivo can automatically recognize in the text whenever that participant is mentioned, right? So you can code, NVivo can do that for you. That can be helpful in some types of research. And if you're doing teamwork, meaning more than one person is coding an NVivo file at the same time, that's not something that I have used in my own projects, but NVivo does allow you to compare the code, how two or more people coded the same file, and verify to what extent there are discrepancies in how people coded. And that is here. You go on query and you run a coding comparison, and it will give you a kappa coefficient, that a coefficient that tells you the level of discrepancy in or consistency in coding between two people. So that helps make sure that all the members of our research team are on the same page when it comes to coding. Any questions? All right. So now to analyzing the data, right? So that's the cool part. So you've done the hard work of setting up your data set on NVivo, and then you applied all the codes. Now you want to see the results, right? You want to see if there are any patterns right there. There are different ways of doing that. Some of them, more sophisticated than others, right? And as I said before, they're different. NVivo allows you to do the same thing in different ways, right? So if you double click on a case or a code, as I showed to Nick before, it will show you everything that is coded under a certain code. So here I can see good quote, right? So if I double click here, NVivo will show me from every file everything that was coded as a good quote, right? So I can print this out, right? I can even, say, do a right click here. I can print it. I can export it as a Word file. And then I can analyze it, right? That's one simple way, right? So everything that was coded under, let's say, family, and then you just review those excerpts and see if you can find yourself, patterns there. That's a pretty, rough, raw, rudimentary way of analyzing data on NVivo. Another way, doing a right click on the code. Let's say here the code language, right? So every time that participants talked about language, that's a major issue for immigrants, right? So that was very much talked about. And so this is a very broad code. I apply it often. So if I go here and do a right click, go all the way down to visualize, and then I ask to, let's say, chart the node. So this can shows me different things, right? Here it is showing me how the frequency in which this code was applied across different files. So I have here the different, at the bottom of the horizontal axis, the different files, right? So I can see that here there's one, I can see identify, let's say the files, the interviews, the focus groups in which that topic was really prominent, right? I can also do that instead of for files here, as is on the right, I can do it for cases. I have a large number of cases, but you can tell here, and here it's considering both, these high numbers here are the focus groups, right? So the focus groups in which this topic was really talked about the most. Here I can see that it's in honors, it's HC because the name of the dialogue was Honors Conversations on Immigration. So it was on the Honors Conversation 7 that people talked about language the most. Right? And on the vertical axis, you can choose references coded as, you know, what it will be shown on the vertical axis. So that means the number of passages that were coded. But it can also choose percentage, right? And that will show you the percentage of how much of the so for instance, you can have you can code a passage, and NVivo will call that a reference. It might be a single sentence, so that's one reference. But if you decide to code, you know, someone that said a whole paragraph about that topic, it will still be one reference, right? But that longer one will take a larger percentage of the document of the interview than the other one. So if you look at percentage coverage, you will get this other view, right? Not looking at, you're not comparing just number of references, but how much of the text that reference takes, right? So that's one that you already can see certain things here. Now let me close here the chart. Let's look at other things that you can do on visualizing here. Explore diagram. Let me see what will come up here. No. Yes. Okay. It looks quite messy, but it's a pretty interesting tool, right? So here at the center, you can barely see, but at the very center of this figure, you have the code, right? Language. And all the arrows, they point out to where the code was applied. So you can see here in white the documents, the files to which that code was applied, and also in this colorful circle, those are the cases, right? And I can come here on the right, and I can, you know, just show me all the cases to which this code was applied. So I unselect files, and it will show me all the cases. So I can see here everyone, all the participants who talked about language, right? That's one way, right? And you can zoom in here so you can see here language, it was applied to all these cases. Okay. Still quite messy, right? It's not showing me much, right? So let me close this. And you can do the right clicks also on files. So I can go here, let's say to Honors Conversation number 3, the segment in which participants talk about tensions over immigration. And I can do a right click here, visualize, also chart. And it's showing on the horizontal axis the codes that were mostly applied. So I can see here that in this one honors conversation, in this session, Participants gave perspective a lot to each other. Participants talked a lot about language. They talked a lot about race. Right? I can use, instead of number of references, I want to see percentage coverage in this document, right? To account for the fact that some references might be very short, some references might be very long, right? So here, I can see language, everything that was coded in that one transcript, everything that was coded as language occupies about 18% of that whole document. Right? So I can tell here right now that language is the topic that was most talked about in that session. Right? And perspective giving was the most common way through which people engage with each other in that one focus group, right? By giving their perspective to others on how they experience the world, how they see things. Right? Usually that happens in this project here through storytelling. Okay, it also can show me, can also visualize, I can do an explore diagram. So here at the center, now I don't have a code. I have the file, right? That one transcript. And it will show me all the codes that were applied to that file. And also the cases, as you can see here. And if I want to show me just the cases, just the nodes. I click here, so I have here all the codes that were applied to this this file. I can even move things around, NVivo will allow you to do this. That's helpful if you eventually create a diagram like this, and it you want to put as a figure on your paper. Right? You can edit as you wish. Okay, so this is pretty simple, right? Pretty basic analysis. Let's try to do things that give data to us that is a little less raw, right? That we can already read something. NVivo, so I can go here to analyze the different types of analysis. Actually, query is where you can analyze is mostly how you apply codes, right? Query is actually trying to tools that let you see patterns in the data. A very basic one, word frequency, right? So I can see here for all files, let's see here. Let's say I want NVivo to show me to create a word frequency cloud just based on the segments, on the focus groups that talked about tensions over immigration. So I can go here and select tensions. These are 7 dialogues, so I have 7 sessions in which they talked about tensions over immigration. Okay, I select this. And it allows you also to tell NVivo how many, how long should be the words that NVivo will search. And I think 3 is too little because then the or and will appear very frequently. So let me see, let's say 5, right? So 5 is the minimum length of words that will appear in this. And instead of giving me the 1,000 most frequent words, just give me the top 20, right? And I can ask NVivo to run this query. It's taking a while probably because I'm running WebEx and NVivo at the same time. Okay. So here I have a list of the 20 most common words. So I have here the length of the word, how many letters, the count, and the percentage, right? How often it appeared there. And I can generate a word cloud. All right. To be honest, I never really I think this is a really crude way of doing qualitative data analysis, but it can be a first step, right? So people is the most common word here, but immigrants, and then you have silly things like inaudible, right? So whenever one of my research assistants were trying to do a transcription, they could not hear what they were saying. I told him to type inaudible, so it's also common here. So you pick up things that are not really meaningful, right? So that's why I think this is maybe too basic. Okay, now something interesting is you can do a coding query. So you can ask NVivo to search everything that was coded under one code or something that was coded with two codes, right? So let's do that, right? So I can go here, query. Instead of word frequency, now we're going to coding. Okay. Again, let's look for the segments in which participants are talking about tensions over immigration. So I can go here and select. And so for you, this could be, you may be selecting only, the focus groups with transfer students as opposed to the focus groups with 4-year students, right? The transcripts. So I see tensions, 7 segments on tensions. Okay, so those are the files where NVivo is going to do the search. And I want everything that was coded as, let's say, everything that was coded as language and everything that was coded as, let's say, let me go to a relational code, and let's say agreement, right? Incorroboration and possible domination, which are types of agreement, right? So corroboration for me was when someone agree with another person, but adding corroborating evidence or logic, right? Not just someone saying like, oh yeah, that's right. Oh, I agree with that, right? And possible domination in this case is if I have, for instance, a participant of a dominant social group and a participant of an oppressed social group, right? So if, let's say, there's a gay person and a straight person, and the straight person says something and the gay person just say, oh yeah, I agree with that. I classified that as a possible domination, meaning the person from oppressed social group might just be, deferring to the person who comes from a social position of more authority or recognition, right, or more power. Okay. So through this query now, NVivo will show me from those files on tensions, so those conversations on tensions over immigration, where I applied the code language, and also where I applied the code agreement, corroboration, or possible domination. So NVivo will show me the passages in which people are agreeing on the topic of language, right? So I can run this query. And NVivo will show me every time that happens. Right? So I can export this, I can print this document, this query, the results, and I can analyze there and see what are the patterns here, right? So when people agree, when they talk about language, what are they agreeing about, right? And since I know I have a notation here, for instance, this first participant 9 is a woman, African American. So I can even see, who are the people that are agreeing with each other, right? Is it mostly Black people agreeing with each other, mostly Latino people? Is it women agreeing with women or not, right? I could do the same thing for moments of disagreements. And you can quote, you can, ask NVivo to pull up data coded under only one code, 2 codes, 3 codes, right? So you can create the query. Okay, now is probably my favorite tool in NVivo, which is called matrix coding, right? So NVivo will generate for you a table, right? So you'll go here on a query. It's another type of query, matrix coding. So you will select what will be the columns of the matrix, the table, and what will be the rows. So suppose, I have my thematic codes such as family, youth, school, race, and I have the different focus groups, right? And I want to see how that code might vary those um, across those focus groups, right? For instance, the code family. Was the conversation about family concentrated in some dialogues more than in others? Do I see some pattern in that? Because I built, suppose your focus groups are with, you have two focus groups with, let's say, Hispanic students, one just Hispanic students, one just white students, one just African American students. And you have the code family that you apply to the transcripts of those focus groups. Do white students talk about family as much as black students? So maybe you want that question, you want to answer that question. So you can do that here. So here again, I want to select the items, the files on which NVivo is going to do the search, and I'm going to select all of them, right? So you can see here, all of them are selected. Okay. On the rows, I want to select the items. We'll go here to nodes, and I will, let's just look at, economic problems. Right? So I will select both the parent code and also the child nodes related to that. So economic anxiety, economic competition, poverty. Right? Economic competition is, for instance, if someone made a statement that, oh, immigrants are taking our jobs, right? So that's a feeling of that immigrants and US born people are competing for jobs for an economic resource. So that's economic competition. Okay, so I selected here, those will be the rows. The columns would be the, let me see the cases here. So I have here the dialogues. Each of the 7 dialogues. Let's see if this will work. Run query. Okay, so I can have here, let me expand this, the rows, the codes, and here each column is a focus group. So I can see here, let's say economic anxiety, right? The second row. Economic anxiety appears only, I applied that code only to the second focus group. So that's already interesting to me, right? Why is that, right? Why did this topic only appear here in this, in this one dialogue and not in the other ones? And I can tell you right now because I know the data. That's the dialogue, the focus group in which I had a majority of conservative participants, white American conservatives, right? And we know that, if you studied American politics in the past, 5 years or so, that economic anxiety was one of the characteristics of middle to low income white Americans, right? So it can help you see patterns in the data, right? And if I look here at poverty, right? Poverty seems to be very concentrated in the first and then the fourth segment, right? And if I click here in this cell, NVivo will show me everything that was coded in that cell, right? Poverty in the focus group number 4, right? So I can see what this is about, right? Great. So I think matrix coding is really good, like really cool. So suppose instead of comparing what people are talking about, the distribution of codes across different focus groups or different interviews, I want to compare across the race and ethnicity of the participants. Right? So let's change here the column, no longer cases. I will choose an attribute, which is one classification, right? So I will choose a classification of a participant, and it will be their race, ethnicity. I want NVivo to show me all the races and ethnicities that I set up as attributes. Run query. Okay. So now I have here, again, on the rows, the 3 codes on economic problems, and here how they are distributed across participant race and ethnicity. So if you look here, economic anxiety, again, like the second row, you will see that it's largely concentrated on participants of white American identification. Right? So largely that was a sentiment expressed by participants of a certain racial ethnic background. Right? So this is, NVivo is allowing you to see patterns in different ways. Right? Any questions so far about these coding queries? I know that I'm going over a lot here for you to digest. But hopefully you can see, how many things NVivo might be able to do to your research. Okay, another way of analyzing. So now let's move from the queries to the explore, different ways of exploring the data. And my favorite here is hierarchy charts. Right? A hierarchy chart will show you, a big rectangle with small rectangles inside. That's what it always shows, So it basically shows, it's a way for you to seeing which codes are more prominent in your data, more salient, right? So it can help you identify, the most important themes in your research. So let's suppose I can select the files in which I'm going to do this search. No, here selected items. So let's go back to the segments in which participants talk about their similarities and differences. I have 7 segments in which that was done. Okay. And I want to code for nodes, but not all nodes not all codes because my codes are not comparable. As you remember, I have 2 sets of codes, thematic and relational. So let me look just at the relational codes. Let's do that. Compare nodes, only the relational nodes, all this. Okay. So NVivo looked at all the sessions in which participants are talking about similarities and differences between immigrants and US-born people. And it showed me how important the different relational codes are for those files. Right? And you can see here how perspective giving across differences is one relational process, right? When someone gives perspective about their experience of the world to other people. And this is the code that was applied the most to those files. So that's why it's the largest rectangle here. The second one, perspective taking. When someone, is trying to see, when a man is talking about how, trying to see the world from the perspective of a woman, showing some empathy, right? So that's perspective taking. Right? Interactive critical thinking, agreement. And here I can click, I can focus, zoom in into agreement to see how the subcodes, the child nodes, will compare. So I have here corroboration, and here I have that other code, possible domination. Right? Go back. Right? So NVivo shows me here what are the most salient relational processes here that took place in those segments. I can also show this in the form of a sunburst, right? Like a pie chart. Right? Or a summary if I actually want to see the actual numbers that are behind those figures. Can also code for, instead of coding for nodes, I can code for attributes. And in this project, I have attributes of cases, right? I classify the cases according to the participants, according to their gender, and according to their race ethnicity. So I can attribute for cases. I'm not looking at the congregation as a case here. I'm looking at the participants, and I'm looking at their race ethnicity. And it will show me here for those files, for those segments on similarities and differences between immigrants, those conversations, most participants were Latinos, Then I also had a large amount of white American participants and then African American participants. So here again, NVivo letting you look at your data from different angles. Lastly, we have NVivo can do comparison diagrams, right? So you can compare different files or you can compare different nodes, right? So let me compare cases as well. And I think you can only do 2 at a time. It has to be pairs. So let's compare what participant 1 said and what participant 2 said. So I have here white American woman, and I have here an African American man in this research. And it will show me here the 2 cases, the codes that I applied to both cases, and here only the codes that I applied to participant 2, and here on the left, only the codes that I applied to participant 1, right? Instead of 2 participants, you can have 2 focus groups there, right? Or 2 interviews, right? And you can compare, like, oh, here's the transcript of the focus group with transfer students. Here is the transcript of the focus group with 4-year students. I can compare, right? Which codes were applied to both. That might point out to some commonalities. Which are the codes that are applied to one or the other. That might point out to some differences, right, between those 2 groups of students. So that's it. Now we are already, I've been speaking for over an hour. You're probably tired of hearing me go over these little things. I know that, this session will be recorded, so is being recorded now, so you are able to go back and, recall certain things. But I would really, advise you to either buy an NVivo book or, watch those tutorials and go from there. A good start to, play with, to learn with NVivo is to do a literature review on NVivo. So you upload all your articles there that will be part of your literature review or your book chapters. You create codes to classify, to apply to those articles. For instance, you can have one code about methodology. So every time that you read something on those articles there is about methodology, you apply the code methodology. And then you can, at the end, pull up everything that you classified as, you coded as methodology, and then you can, review those excerpts and then see, okay, what are the methods typically applied in this field, in this literature, right? Or, you can code for argument, conclusion, findings, right? So yeah, let me close here, or at least stop sharing so that I can look at you again. Oh, I just noticed that there is caption here and everything. Great. Rachel, yes, NVivo book. So I have here this is the book that I used. We had a workshop at UMBC with an NVivo certified instructor a few years ago. Qualitative Analysis with NVivo by Christy Jackson and Pat Basley. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Emma, go ahead.
So you brought up the great point about the value of going into a little more detail when describing one's qualitative methods in a research paper. And I don't want to ask you to go through, many paragraphs, but could you maybe give us a little more of an example of perhaps how you most recently wrote some of your methods section and some of the things you focused on?
Okay, so let me pull up, I'm writing a book on that project, so let me pull up here the methodological appendix that I created just to show you as an example. It's still a draft, but I don't mind sharing it with you. You were in my honors class, weren't you?
Yes.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Let me see here. And this is a book, so if in an article you wouldn't have to go to this level of detail. But let me show you here. I'll share my screen. So this is what I call the methodological appendix of my book. Just showing you parts of it. Whoops. Where does it start? Okay, so let's start here. So here's where I present the coding scheme, right? So all the codes that I applied, right? Here, and then I explain here the steps that I took. For instance, I always coded first for thematic codes and second for relational codes, right? The thematic codes I applied to single utterances, so one sentence without interruption. The relational codes, because they're about people interacting with each other, I applied to single or multiple utterances, right? So if it's a whole segment in which people are agreeing with each other, right? Then I applied the final coding scheme to all segments. First, the segments on envisioning collaboration, then the segments and analyze the results to write chapter 5. Then I did the same for the segments on ground rules and faith traditions to write chapter 2. I also apply codes to identify participants, right? On NVivo, these codes are called cases, where each participant is a case to which demographic added. So I'm really explaining everything, that I did, right? And then here, the procedures that I used to identify the most salient themes, right? And I say here that I used hierarchy charts on NVivo to identify the most recurrent parental codes. Then I reviewed all the excerpts under each of the most recurrent parental codes along the way and wrote notes along the way. I used matrix coding on NVivo to see how the codes might have varied on the level of dialogues and also on the level of individual participant identity. So I'm really here, extensively explaining step by step. I don't even know if the editor, this is just a manuscript for my book. I don't know if, after the editor takes a look, they might say, oh, this is too much detail. We don't need to know that much. You can, summarize that. But I rather, be detailed now to be able to show to the editor the rigor of my research. And then if the editor later wants me to summarize or take that out, I can do that, right?
Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else? All right, then. Thank you very much for being with me this morning. Now it's afternoon. Again, this will be recorded. And if in the future you have any questions about NVivo that I might be able to answer, just shoot me an email. I'm going to write here in the chat box. It's filomeno@umbc.edu. Okay. Enjoy your Friday and have a good weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.